Hello and welcome to Daily Records. I am Tommy Burton and we are talking about the Beatles and talking about solo Beatles, and we're talking about cover albums. Now a lot of you are probably saying, well, George Harrison never recorded a covers album, and he didn't. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk about Cloud 9. The 1987 album released on November 2nd, 1987. And this was his 11th album. And the reason I'm going to talk about this along with the covers album is because it's got this single on it, Got My Mind Set on You, which is a cover song as well as a big hit. Now, George had taken a bit of a hiatus from music and not really released anything. And so there was a hit single, Got My Mind Set on You, and it sort of reintroduced George Harrison to critical and commercial acclaim. And so this was an album he did, and sadly enough, this will be the last studio album that he ever released during his lifetime. Now, there is another album after that, but it was released after he passed. Now, George had gotten really frustrated with the music business and particularly the climate of the business. And so he took a break. And so in the early 80s, he decided to do some other things. He got into film production, started a company called Handmade Films. And so he would maybe pop up on a soundtrack or something, but for the most part, he stayed silent musically. Now, after a little break, he kind of started to get the itch to make music again, and so he teamed up with Electric Light Orchestra frontman Jeff Lynne and said, "Hey, let's make an album." And so they kind of started working on some new stuff, even some stuff that he'd already contributed to the Handmade Films Shanghai Surprise. He went into his home studio and in early '87 and just began to record in earnest. And so he recorded about 17 songs between January and March, and then he started working on overdubs and was done by August. Now, he sort of had this new found interest. He had a lot of enthusiasm, so he actively went out and promoted the album. He showed up with Ringo Starr at the Princess Trust concert and played While My Guitar Gently Weeps and Here Comes the Sun. The album featured quite a few of his friends. Jim Keltner and Ringo playing drums. Eric Clapton, longtime friend. Gary Wright and Elton John. Elton John was actually recovering from vocal surgery around this time. And said, hey, I'm excited to be back. And so that's what he did. And of course, there's some great photos in here of him and the guys. And kind of what they were doing. And even in the special thank you, John, Paul, and Ringo, which was kind of a nice touch. Now, Got My Mind Set on You, which was the big hit. It was a little, not even a big song until George did it. And it was a number one hit when George did it. And still gets heavily played on radio. And so this was a big mainstream hit, and it was a bit of a surprise. And so it helped propel the album, into a lot of enthusiastic response. Now, there were a couple of other hits on this album. There was a Beatles tribute, When We Was Fab. Wonderful single, very Jeff Lynne sounding. And also a song, This Is Love, which became a little bit of a hit in the UK. Never quite caught on in the United States, but fantastic song. Now, the other side of this didn't really just kind of light a fire under Harrison to keep recording, but it did kind of get him into, he didn't do a tour or anything like that, but he did continue making music. And the next year, in 1988, he teamed up with Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, and Roy Orbison and began work on what would become the Traveling Wilburys. And so a very worthy album and one of the nicer albums in George Harrison's catalog. Fans of Jeff Lynne should definitely check this album out. And it's a really probably one of the better, if I won't say best, but one of the better Beatles 80s albums for sure. It's a solid record. That's why it's today's daily record, George Harrison's Cloud 9. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter. It's Tommy Burton 75. In the meantime, I'll see you all again tomorrow with another daily record.